Welcome to Northwest Profiles, a look at people, places, and events of interest in the inland Northwest.
Beautiful treasures from the past, from unique civilizations that have come and gone and left their mark for future generations to analyze and critique. These are Treasures of Antiquity, an exhibit of Greek and Roman art on loan to Cheney Cowles Museum from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Barbara Raker, Curator of Art for Cheney Cowles Museum.
It's an exhibit that dates from 525 BC to 280 AD, and that means it goes from the Greek Archaic period up to near the legalization of Christianity. So what you see is a profound progress or change from the oldest object in the exhibit, which is a primitive head of a soldier. It looks very Egyptian-like, very primitive compared to the height of the classic period, to the most recent piece in the exhibit, which is a part of a seasoned sarcophagus. It shows really how the classical elements of art that were so important at the peak of Greek civilization have become less important. We are entering a Christian period where man is no longer the measure of all things, which is a famous Greek quote, and God is the center of the world rather than man. So human figures and the depiction of human figures became less important.
With materials of predominantly bronze, marble, terracotta, and limestone, many of the pieces took on a different hue many years ago.
We tend to think of Greek sculpture and Greek temples as only white. We appreciate the aesthetics or look of the marble. But you have to remember back then, everything was brightly painted. And in the exhibit, you can still see remnants of some paint in some smaller terracottas. We have many examples between the terracotta and the bronze of votive figures. And votive figure meaning figures that were used in worship. They could have been used in household shrines, could have been used in graves. Many of these pieces were found in graves, and they could have been used in sanctuaries. They take on different forms. It could be an animal, which in some cases represents an attribute of a god or goddess. It could be a form of the god or goddess themselves, or it could represent the worshiper.
Pieces range from small bronze figures in animal and human form to Roman terracotta oil lamps. Vases also figure predominantly in the exhibit.
I think some of the most beautiful pieces in the exhibit are the vases. We have one black figure vase and 10 red figure vases. And when I say black figure, that's exactly what it means. The figure on the vase is in black, which is a slip or a paint that was applied to the vessel. The red figures mean that it is the red color of the clay, and around it the black slip is painted. The black figure technique was invented in Corinth about 650 BC, and the vases became so popular and were exported widely that the potters of Corinth decided they needed to mass produce these. Athens actually picked up the black figure technique and dominated the market. About 530 BC, an Athenian potter decided he was going to do the reverse, which was leave the figures in the red of the clay and paint around them. And that actually led to a swift progress in depicting figures naturalistically on the vases. The vases give us evidence, I think, of the role of women in Greek society. We know that they were very protected, that they were rarely allowed to go outside of the household, and it's the paintings on the vases that show us images of how women lived and what they did inside this household that many people didn't see. You see women in a domestic setting, a woman with the help of two servants getting dressed for the day. These were all images that you don't see in other art forms. They were not considered important enough to be sculpted. They were, however, of enough interest to the civilization to be important for vases.
Men and women were viewed quite differently in ancient Greek culture, and importance was depicted in their art.
Men were obviously the dominant members of society, and you see that in Greek art. We see many depictions of males and nude males rather than women. When you see women, most often they're heavily draped. This tells us many things. We know that there is a great interest and importance placed on athleticism. The fact of the matter was that athletes performed and practiced in the nude and in public. Nudity was not something that was bad. This was the way society was. It also shows that the athleticism, the athletic character, and the importance civilization placed on it also has to do with those issues of individuality, that competition was very important, that the competition placed honor on the athlete and on his state and on his family as well. The first Olympics were in 776 BC. That's where we start the timeline at the beginning of the exhibit. This was about the time that the Greek world came out of a dark age. And this was the beginning of what we see and what we study now.
Religion also played an integral part in ancient Greek and Roman society. When the Roman civilization conquered the Greek civilization,
they were very flexible, and actually anytime they conquered another civilization, it was sort of a melting pot. The Romans took the Greek beliefs and their different gods and goddesses and combined it with their own. So, for example, Aphrodite became Venus in the Roman civilization. Zeus became Jupiter, and on and on. I think people commonly think of the gods and goddesses sometimes by their Roman names. In the exhibit, they are identified by their Greek name.
A traveling display of this magnitude has many considerations that must be met, all of which Cheney Cowles had to satisfy before it was even considered for this special exhibition. Laura Thayer, Curator of Collections.
Different kinds of materials that artworks are made from are most stable in a certain kind of environment, a temperature level and a relative humidity level. It so happens that the objects in this exhibit are most stable at a temperature level of around 68 degrees and a relative humidity of about 40 to 45. Now, in our region, our relative humidity average is below 30%. So we have to add moisture to the air in this gallery to bring it up to 45% to meet the standards the museum requires. They're crated in special crates that are made by specialists, and a lot of the research that's been done to create crates like this has been done by physicists. So the crates are made in such a way that all of these items are carefully cushioned inside, and then of course there's a very hard exterior shell. Also, when they travel, they're handled by specialists, people who know how to handle crates that have fragile items in them. We see these items here and we're amazed that they're 2,000 years old. And it is really extraordinary. At this point in history, these items are so carefully handled and so carefully considered anytime somebody wants to use them in an exhibit or a curator wants to travel them to another place. But if you think about their history, some have been found buried deep in rubble pits. Other items have been traded over generations and they still survive in spite of their fragility. And it's actually quite remarkable when you think about it.
Many of the pieces on display have been damaged through time, facilitating repair work, which today consists of standard procedures.
Early repairs made to these kinds of artifacts were very intrusive, and they imposed their 18th century or 19th century tastes on the item. Now in the 20th century, we have a lot more information about the past. We have a lot better technology. And also, we have decided as a culture that it's more important to preserve the historic integrity of an item. So when we make a conservation treatment, we try hard to not change the item in any way, only to stabilize it and make it presentable. One of the rules about conservation is that when you do conservation work, you make it so that it's 100% reversible, and it doesn't really inflict itself visually on the item. So usually most repairs are pretty visible.
Some of the pieces were damaged through time, but other pieces were sometimes meant to be damaged.
Why we see figures without heads and heads without noses. In this exhibit, you'll see lots of heads without figures. So some other museum or some other collection has a figure without the head. It was a common practice when an invader or a conqueror came in to cut off the head of the statue or cut off the nose of the statue. It was a metaphor or a symbol of that event. Other reasons we have fragments are that many of the marble pieces were thrown into lime kilns to become concrete. They were not valued when later civilizations came in.
Artifacts such as these provide a historical view of societies when they were produced, and through time speak volumes about ourselves.
I think that that's one of the most important things that people can get out of this exhibit. I would like people to come in and not just admire the pieces for their beauty, which is something important, but also to understand the objects as these are the objects, and the people who created them, the civilization that created them, are the foundation of how we think and who we are and the kind of art that was produced after it. And I think that whether people are conscious or not, there is a great interest because this is the foundation of who we are as a Western society.
If you have a topic for Northwest Profiles, send it to KSPS TV, 3911 South Regal, Spokane, Washington, 99223. Northwest Profiles is a presentation of KSPS Public Television.